Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, July 27th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps and steps and steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Colin Woodard, author of Union, struggled to forge the story of United States nationhood. Also on the program today, the Republican Senate dithers as millions are set to become evicted and enhanced unemployment insurance set to expire. Meanwhile, Trump's national security advisor tests positive for COVID. The largest vaccine phase 3 test with 30,000 people starts today. Meanwhile, protests continue as Trump threatens to deploy 75,000 federal goons to states around the country. Speaking of which, Trump's handling of Corona polling at an all-time low, and not coincidentally, Joe Biden's lead in battleground states grows. Tom Cotton denies he believes slavery is a necessary evil for this country. It's good that he clarified that. And in the wake of Sinclair's media's featuring the plandemic conspiracy, Anthony Fauci needs security for himself and his family. All this and more on today's program. Thanks for joining us. It's the first show that we are having since the passing of Michael Brooks. And, look, this is going to be weird. It's going to be weird for a long time. It's going to be weird for you folks listening and watching the show. It's going to be weird for us doing the show. At times it's going to be sad. At times it's, hopefully maybe we can make a couple of jokes at Michael's expense. I understand that he is not able to joke back. But I will, for an extended period of time, allow for people to call in to the show in the fun half with impersonating his impersonation of me. But it's got to be good. Don't call in with a half-assed one, because Michael wouldn't have stood for that, and I will not either. But over the weekend, yesterday actually, there was a very, very small memorial for Michael up in Massachusetts. Obviously, there are COVID restrictions, and despite the fact that it's a weird thing to go to a memorial service and not be able to hug anybody or comfort anybody because of the pandemic that is raging now, And despite the fact that, everyone was wearing masks and we were in a big field and there was in a big circle and kept 6 feet apart. It was a beautiful ceremony. It was, I felt very fortunate to be able to sort of, I had met a couple of members of his family before, but to meet his entire family and to meet sort of representatives of different parts of Michael's life, and both in terms of, I guess, segments of his life and both from a temporal standpoint and in terms of like an interest standpoint. And people were some very moving, just shares, I guess, of the people's experience with Michael. And it was a lovely ceremony, and there was a little bit of humor there, as I think he would want. And there's going to be, we're going to try and commemorate Michael on this program, and I know that the guys over at TMBS are going to be doing stuff to commemorate Michael. One of the things we're thinking about is maybe, I don't know if we'll be able to do it in time this Thursday, but maybe for the month of August, we will play on Thursdays some repeats of some of his interviews. How you can help in that process is to send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. Put in the subject line "for Michael," and if there is a specific interview that he did on a Thursday, or really, from this show, the TMBS guys are dealing with that stuff. But from this show over the years, if there's a specific interview, if there's a specific segment, and help us out. Give us the date of the interview if you can. If it's a segment, don't just write, that one time that he did this. If you can help us by looking for the segment and pointing us to it or sending a link, that will help us incredibly. We're all a little out of sorts, and there are material implications of his passing, but there's also a lot of emotional implications of his passing. So anything you can do to make that process easier for us, that would be great. But we're going to commemorate him that way, and then we're coming up with other ideas, and we will let you know those as they go on. And bear with us at times. We're going to have moments where I imagine we're going to be sad. We're also going to have moments, I know, that I'm going to try and make jokes about Michael. I'm not going to just keep knocking the guy, but in part to keep his memory alive, and in part just because that's the way we're going to deal with it. So bear with us. Give us a little benefit of the doubt. I mean, there may be times where, I don't know. I can contemplate times where we make a joke about Michael, and some people might say, would he take offense to that? I'm quite sure he would not. But give us the benefit of the doubt in those moments. And that's it. So we're going to try and do our best, move forward, normalize things in a, the latest in the new normals that we're all dealing with in many respects. And, tomorrow we're going to start ads on the show. And we're just going to, keep trying to move forward, continue various aspects of Michael's project. And I know they're talking over at TMBS, and David and Matt are talking to Alicia, Michael's sister, and they're trying to figure out what the best way to move forward with the things that Michael was working on. And so, we will do the same. With that said, the people are, we are dealing with the situation in this country right now, obviously, where apparently the president has pivoted a little bit to acknowledging that maybe there should be something done about the coronavirus. And that is that masks are not evil. And that seems to be about it. No money for contact tracing, no money to bulk up the testing capacity. I got an email from someone last week, maybe it was a week before, when we were talking about testing, and they said they work in a lab. The big problem is there's just simply a lack of people who have the technical skills to do this, and sort of secondary supply chain issues. By secondary, I mean like reagents and I don't know, swabs, stuff that could be provided to these facilities with the invocation of the Defense Production Act. And the idea that Donald Trump will not invoke this is absurd. So much of what we're witnessing now almost defies explanation, just in terms of response to something that is real. And so, we'll talk about that. But on the other end of this is the fact that we're going to have to reshut the economy in many states around the country. And we are starting to see bad economic numbers head back in the wrong direction. And we are days away from millions of people beginning the process of being evicted from their homes. And we are days away from seeing millions of people lose a significant portion of the unemployment benefits they've been getting for the past 3 months or so, because I don't even know why. It doesn't even make sense on their own terms. Here is Steve Mnuchin. Let's start with this one. This is clip number 5. Here's Steve Mnuchin at a press hearing. Right now, a COVID economic relief bill is tied up in the Senate because they can't figure out the best way to deny Americans robust is not the right word, adequate unemployment benefit. They really desperately want to do that. And they're just trying to figure out technically the best way of doing it. Here's Mnuchin.
But the fundamental issue, and we all acknowledged, there was a technical problem where we were in emergency last time, so we instituted this quickly. And in certain cases, people were paid more to stay home than they were to work. And I think that's something that the American public understands. We're not going to use taxpayer money to pay people more to stay home. So we're going to transition to a UI system that is based upon wage replacement. We've talked about approximately 70% wage replacement, and we're just going through the mechanics of that.
All right. So,
and there's very strong.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Keep playing it. I didn't realize there was another clip.
Very strong tax incentives, tax credits in this bill to get people back to work.
First of all, the premise is insane. We should be paying people to stay home from work. That's exactly what we should be doing if we were taking this pandemic seriously. If we realized the mistake that we had made in the first instance, which was not aggressively paying people to stay home across the board because you had states like Florida or Texas that didn't want to pay unemployment insurance. We should be paying people to stay at home. And there is a small amount of people who are getting paid more to stay at home than they would have had they had their job existed. There's no guarantee that the job exists anyways. But so what? So what? It has helped the economy. It is the only thing that's keeping the economy afloat. You can still have consumer spending if the government pays people to stay home. And it's the consumer spending that's keeping everything afloat at this point. It's the only thing that is going to diminish the amount of people who are being evicted. It's utterly bizarre. And be clear on what's happening. The average benefit that a state gives when you get unemployment insurance is about 45, 50%. Depends on the state. Sometimes it can be a little bit higher, sometimes a little bit lower. The federal government, instead of saying we're going to give an extra 20, 25% or whatever it is, just said blanket number $600 per person per week. In some instances, that brought people up to, I don't know, 75% of wages, 80%, 90%, 105%, 110%. And now they're trying to figure out, well, how can we technically make sure that we don't have any people who are getting above 70%? This is just, it's madness. Here he is on Chris Wallace. And even Chris Wallace on Fox News is like, well, wait a second. It's a good thing to pay people to stay at home, A, and B, it's also the only thing that's keeping the economy afloat.
That the GDP number for the second quarter nationally will not be the plus 1 or 2 or 3% that we normally see, but instead for the second quarter will be something like minus 33%. One, is that what we should expect to see, a contraction of the economy by a third in the second quarter? And secondly, if it's anything like that, why would you want to cut back on the $600 stimulus payments, the unemployment benefits? Because there are projections that even if you cut it to around $200, which is basically what I think you're talking about, with a 75% of wages, there are estimates that that's going to cost millions of jobs.
Well, Chris, we always said the second quarter was going to be a very bad quarter.
Just want to be clear here. Chris Wallace understands that if you inhibit the buying power of the American consumer, that's going to cost other jobs. You're trying to save money with this $200 as opposed to $600 a week thing, but you're going to end up spending it on the other end when you knock more people out of work. It's insanity. And Mnuchin, remember in that last clip, it's like, well, we have tax incentives to bring people back to work. It literally is the functional equivalent of saying, like, we're not only going to not pay people to jump off the cliff, we're going to encourage them by forcing them to jump off the cliff, and then also make it even more fun for them by giving them tax incentives when they jump off the cliff.
Again, that's not for economic reasons, that's for health reasons. We literally shut down the entire economy. And I think, as we've said, we expect the third quarter, the consensus is 17% GDP. So we do think you're going to see a very big rebound. I might just also comment on June retail sales were 1% higher than June of last year. So all that money we pumped into the economy, it worked. People went out and spent. And on the, as it relates to the unemployment insurance, again, I think workers and Americans understand the concept that you shouldn't be paid more to stay home than to work, that the fair thing is to replace wages, and it just wouldn't be fair to use taxpayer dollars to pay more people to sit home than they would get working and get a job.
It's just insanity. Have people been complaining about the fairness of keeping the economy afloat? Because people who work at sub-living wages are now actually making slightly more. It's just absurd. It really is absurd. And in many respects, it's inexplicable. It's just, I guess, their ideology, or I don't know. You would imagine that Donald Trump, seeing that he's losing in the polls in battleground state after battleground state, would say, hey, like, guys, why don't we just give money? It's almost like they just sort of, I don't know, it's some type of kabuki. All right, we got to take a quick break. When we do, we'll come back with journalist Colin Woodard, author of Union, The Struggle to Forge the Story of the United States Nationhood. Be right back after this. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program the state and national affairs writer for the Portland Press Herald, Maine Sunday Telegram, and the author of multiple books, the most recent of which, Union, The Struggle to Forge the Story of the United States Nationhood. Colin Woodard, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to be here.
We had you on in 2015 for American Nations, which I would encourage everybody to go back and listen to that interview, because that's a fascinating story as well. And in many respects, this is almost like a sequel in some respects. Maybe that's too strong of a word, but
yeah.
But before we do, let me go into my Rachel Maddow thing for a moment. Because I want to talk about how when I went to high school, we would drink beers in parking lots and in back behind the school. There was something called Newton Hill, and we would drink there. And sometimes we would drive up to an old castle. Was it really a castle? I mean, sort of like a tower, stone tower. And we would drink there, and it was also like a cruising place at the time, and it was called Bancroft Tower, and it was named after George Bancroft in Worcester, Massachusetts. And lo and behold, George Bancroft is one of the, maybe not the, but the protagonist of your book, and it's a fascinating story. I had no idea. And so,
native son of Worcester,
indeed, and well, also as am I. So, tell us about. Let's just start with George Bancroft, and then we'll broaden back out for a moment.
Sure. Well, when I was writing American Nations, which in essence argues that there's never been one America but several Americas, and each of them tie back to the differences between the early colonies that settled on the eastern and southwestern rims of the country, and those distinctions can be felt today. So in writing Union, my task was to understand how it is that we came to think otherwise. Where did our sort of myth or story of United States shared nationhood come from, and who created it and when? And that effort quickly brought me to George Bancroft, who was he's largely forgotten today outside of Worcester, but he was the most preeminent and celebrated historian in the United States throughout the 19th century, and a statesman as well. He ended up serving as Secretary of War under President Polk's administration, Secretary of the Navy, and created the Naval Academy at Annapolis, served as an ambassador. He was a major figure. And it was he who created the first draft of our story of what the purpose of the United States was, where it came from, what held us together, what our special glue was that would hold our entirely separate regional cultures together. And he was a really interesting person. He was a New Englander through and through, born in 1800, and was the son of a leading congregational minister, a descendant of the early Puritans, attended Phillips, Exeter, and Harvard, graduated at 17 or 18, and was sent by the president of Harvard at the time to earn what was then a very rare thing, a doctorate. You could only essentially get a PhD in Germany at the new research universities that were there. He went to Germany and studied under the people who were creating the sort of European and German ideas of what a nation should be. His professors were Hegel and Herring and the Van Humboldts. And then he comes back to New England, and he ends up eventually creating this story through a series of incredibly popular histories of what the United States is supposed to be, that fuses his New England upbringing, the idea that that the Puritans had, that they were a covenanted people, they had a special relationship with God who tasked them to do certain things in the world. He took that idea, an errand in the wilderness to build put a light on the hill to create a more godly society, and fused it with the German romantic nationalist thinking about how each nation was like a living organism, that they grew from a seed from preconceived instructions, and would inevitably, the seed would flower into the adult organism with all these special characteristics. And so Bancroft fused those two together and believes that although it appeared that places like South Carolina and Massachusetts and the Dutch settled area around New York City and the Appalachian backcountry and so on had entirely different ethnographic and religious characteristics and histories, and had been enemies and rivals throughout the colonial period, and had very little in common prior to their shared revolutionary struggle, that indeed, actually, they had all been planted by the same seed that was all growing to create this one American nation that was destined and tasked by God to carry the mantle of freedom forward, that the ideals of the Declaration of Independence were sort of guided by Providence, and that that was what would hold us together, and that we were destined to spread across the continent and to carry the baton of freedom for all humanity forward. So all these ideas you hear, about American exceptionalism, about us having some special, maybe God-endorsed purpose in the world, that was all properly packaged and put together and brought out into the public space by George Bancroft to kick off what ended up being a epic and harrowing fight over what the United States, national story and nationhood would actually be. And
before, and obviously, and we will get, it really takes about 100 years from his birth, I guess, until that gets levied there. So, I want to just jump out for a second and just the relevance of national histories. I mean, I think, tell us what the relevance of a national history is. Because that is, your book is about the sort of this competition on some level that was going on to create that national history. What's the relevance of them to us, let's say, today?
Yeah, and to people everywhere. I mean, it's often conveyed through the writing of histories, but it's the creation of your national story, your national narrative that you tell yourselves about who you are. Because remember, nations are abstract concepts. They're sort of imagined communities, whether you're in Japan or Canada or the United States or Thailand. The idea that we all belong to some extended tribe or family is something that we construct in our heads. And to do that, to imagine as individuals that we have more loyalty to this very large subset of people than to these other subsets of people who belong to other nations, requires a whole story that we can build that makes that credible. So it's essential for any nation's survival and creation to have a story that says where we came from, who we are, and where we're going. And that varies from nation to nation, but you can't really establish and create something that will have that loyalty from individuals unless you can successfully do that. And nations are pretty new things. It's only the past 300 or 400 years that there have been nation states the way we think of them now. And the United States had a particularly challenging set of circumstances at its birth to try to create such a story, to try to get people in Massachusetts or in South Carolina to think of themselves in a genuine way as Americans first, rather than as South Carolinians or Massachusettsians.
For a long time, it was simply you are the people of the king, essentially. And
absolutely,
here's the story of our nation. God said, "I'm the ruler, and I deemed it that you should be part of my nation." End of story.
Right, or not even the word nation used, just that you're part of my kingdom, and that the nation. If I marry some other person and their dowry comes with all these other sections of the planet, that they just suddenly magically become under my kingdom, without any definition of nationhood, or doesn't matter what language you speak or anything else. It was a very different set of ideas than we're used to now. And I think people make the mistake of assuming that like medieval kingdoms were nations when they really weren't. So yeah, this is a pretty new thing. And however, very important, with an enormous impact on history.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Well, for Americans, we didn't have a common language. All of the different colonies had totally different histories. They've been founded by people at different times with different ethnographic and religious characteristics, who were building very different societies with different original intents. Like I said, they'd often be enemies. And so they didn't have a common history. They didn't have a common set of ideals that they were pursuing. We couldn't think of ourselves as having lived in this, homeland since before the lifting of the mists of time, because we've all shown up in, just the past 200 years or so at best. We couldn't think of ourselves as this being our, indigenous place, because the European settlers who had come had expropriated the continent from the native inhabitants who were there and were causing them to be non-citizens in formal and informal ways. So all of the things that many other countries were using to build this idea of nationhood were essentially deprived to the founders of the United States. And yet, by the early 19th century, it was clear that we needed such a story, or all the centripetal forces were going to tear the country apart. There'd already been secession movements, in the Appalachian backcountry during the Whiskey Rebellion, New England considering secession during the War of 1812, the growing schisms over slavery and the implications that had for our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, with its decree that, all people are born inherently equal, which a race-based slave system stood in opposition to. So all of these forces required that you needed to come up with a story. It was a national security crisis. And you ask about the relevance today. I mean, if we fast forward all the way to now, you're seeing some of that crisis played out today, where, what is it that really holds us together, given the different political pressures that are also geographically defined? What is it that is the common threads that will hold our union and hold Americans together as people, is, I think, a relevant question out there. And some of the answers lie in this story.
I can answer that question. We are now the most infected people in the world, and no one wants to have us infect them. So that was.
And what sort of, a sort of a failure of the American project and of federalism, you're seeing it there, right? We're all witnessing our country fail at a fundamental level, at the federal level, to protect its citizens, and the response to this existential crisis being passed on to states and municipalities, and people are all over the map. And if you map the results of the pandemic, there are massive differences at a geographical level.
I want to get to
and so all of this is really relevant.
Yeah, I actually want to get to that. I mean, I read a piece that you did about that relative to the history of the 11 regional cultures of North America. But so let me ask you this: how conscious, and you write about five figures whose national histories are in some respect in competition with each other. Bancroft, William Sims, Douglas, Woodrow Wilson. But why? How conscious were these writers, and particularly Bancroft, because he's the I guess the earliest. How conscious were they of the need for what you were talking about? Like, or how much did they express an awareness of my challenge is to find a cohesion here in this history, to tease this out or to generate it?
Yeah, an excellent question. And the story starts with the beginning with Bancroft, and I ended it when one of the competing visions, and there's essentially two threads that fought with each other, when one of them became dominant over the whole Federation. And so it spans nearly a century. But in the early part, when you have George Bancroft and his deep Southern rival, William Gilmore Simms, fighting over the meaning of the United States, they were very conscious of what they were doing and conscious that they were trying to define the United States as a nation in one direction or another. And of course, the William Gilmore Simms, who was from Charleston in the Deep South, had a very different argument. You know, Bancroft had said that the ideals in the Declaration of Independence about unalienable rights and humans being, born inherently equal, that was completely wrong, that humans were obviously not equal, and that there was a hierarchy in humanity, and only the allegedly superior Anglo-Saxon race had the wisdom and brilliance to be Republican citizens and to see the promise of the United States in the Declaration, and that the real nations were, South Carolina and Massachusetts and Georgia and so on. But what they shared in common was this allegedly superior Anglo-Saxon identity, and that they would form this confederation or federation that would, like the EU, defend them collectively, have trade agreements and provide for defense, but that the real sovereignty would lie at an earlier level. And that battle, the consciousness that was what they were doing, was front and center in what they and their colleagues were talking about during this intellectual and public debate that lasted all the way into and after the Civil War. And Frederick Douglass, who comes in as the pivotal figure in the story, is very conscious of this battle over the soul of the country in very explicit terms. But by the time you get to the latter two, Frederick Jackson Turner, the great historian of the West, and Woodrow Wilson, future president and virulent white supremacist in the William Gilmore Simms tradition, remember, this is now the post-Civil War, and the United States is becoming an industrial power and more sure of itself. So they were taking a vision that was already there and picking up one banner or the other, modifying it for their new circumstances and carrying it forward. But they didn't have to invent the traditions from the beginning, so that wasn't where their heads were at exactly. They were saying, oh, look back, the past 50 years, and I can tie together a story that is better than the competing story.
It also sort of like stunning to me that there's a lot of between Bancroft and Wilson and Turner. There's a lot that goes down in the United States at that time, right? I mean, in terms of like changing the history. Like, I guess I've come to see the Reconstruction as sort of a second founding of the country in some ways. And it's fascinating to me that by the time you get to by the time you get to I guess Turner's sort of history that wins out on some level, or I should say Wilson's, that Reconstruction is sort of I don't know, almost
it's seen as a disaster.
Yeah,
precisely because you tried to imagine that other races could be equal to the great Anglo-Saxons. That was the explicit argument they made. The argument that Wilson made in his histories and in his academic work, and that he practiced as president right through to the segregating of the federal government and the championing of the first great Hollywood blockbuster film that came out during his first term and was co-produced and based on the book by one of his best buddies and graduate school friends, Thomas Dixon Jr. That's Birth of a Nation, which is a book celebrating the Ku Klux Klan's reign of terror to end Reconstruction and successfully roll back the political emancipation of African Americans in the South. A film that actually had placards, right? It was a silent film and had placards quoting Woodrow Wilson's history to prove its points on this. So the story of our nationhood, the story told in Union, is basically a battle between a civic national vision, the one that I described with Bancroft, the idea that what in the end ties Americans together is fealty to the ideals in the Declaration of Independence, against an ethnic national description of who we are. The ethno-national idea that no, there's a subset of people living in the United States who are the true inheritors of the American project, and that other people are somehow excluded because in the American context they lack the capacity to be true true Republican citizens, right? They have fealty to the Pope, or their races obviously doesn't have the cognitive capacity to do these things. These arguments have been rolled out throughout our history to defend, what was originally an Anglo-Saxon or Anglo-Saxon Protestant supremacy, and later a more broad white supremacy, but still is rolled out to exclude certain people as being culturally or perhaps genetically incapable of, exercising, full humanity under the Constitution and the Declaration. And that's the battle told in our book that carries through to Wilson. And unfortunately, under Wilson is when the ethno-national white supremacist vision wins out in the 1910s and 20s for a time. And it's the first vision that actually wins out and has dominance across the Federation, which is rather a chilling thing to realize. That it was vanquished again by the civic national ideas in the 1960s and has been with us as a dominant force since then. But obviously that ethno-nationalist vision did not get vanquished. We're fighting about it in the streets today and in the battle over these monuments and the Confederate flag. So this is a story that we're still living in, and it's the backstory to it. And I hope provides some of the ingredients for how we'd rejuvenate, the better of our two visions, the civic national one, and maybe update it and rejuvenate it for today.
And we should say it is no coincidence at all that a lot of these statues that are being torn down were put up in that very era, between 1910 and 1920, at a time where there was something like 6 or 7% of the country were card-carrying members of the KKK, right? There was like 7 million out and about proud members of the KKK at that time.
Not a coincidence at all, because Birth of a Nation, this film that Wilson helped endorse and who his friend created, actually was literally the thing that sparked the creation of the second KKK. The people who founded it on the eve of the film opening in Atlanta, they rode up onto a mountainside and burned a cross up there to officially commemorate a second Klan, and rode down wearing their Klan attire to the opening, where they fit right in, because at the opening, people dressed in Klan hoods and stuff to, outside the box office to promote the film. That's how, egregious it was. And this is when, Jim Crow really takes hold, and when the Confederate monuments are created. It's this high tide that comes in the Wilson administration and in that era, but it's the triumph of that vision with the aftermath of the collapse of Reconstruction and the retelling of the national narrative around this exclusionary and ethno-nationalist definition of what America is about and who can and can't be a full member of the American project.
And just to be clear too, you write about the attempt of folks to cancel that movie in Boston, where arguably the first, I guess, a civil rights protest take place in regards to that movie.
Yeah, I mean, the parallels with today in that sense too. I mean, I wrote this book, mostly a year and a half ago, so I couldn't have seen this coming. But yeah, the Birth of a Nation had a lot of parallels with the demonstrations we're seeing now. You had this film celebrating this white supremacist triumph in the terrorist campaign during Reconstruction, And at that time, the First Amendment the courts had not yet decided that artistic productions were covered as protected speech. So mayors and governors regularly censored plays and moving pictures that were considered somehow contrary to public morals. So what the protesters were asking for, there were mass protests all across the country, especially in New York, and most of all in Boston, because Boston had been the center of abolitionism, and William Monroe Trotter, the early civil rights leader, organized these huge protests outside the movie theaters. There were clashes with police, but what they were demanding is that the mayor of Boston, or maybe the governor, censor the film, which, given the enormous amount of money that this epic film, a film like had never been seen before, had cost. If they had succeeded in censoring the movie in major markets like New York and Boston and Chicago, the filmmakers would have gone bankrupt. Thomas Dixon Jr., Woodrow Wilson's friend, would have gone bankrupt. So that's why it was so important in the middle of those protests that Woodrow Wilson agreed to Thomas Dixon to show Birth of a Nation to his cabinet in the White House in the middle of the protests, an implicit endorsement of the film at a time when mayors and governors were being asked to censor it. And then the next day, on the strength of that, Thomas Dixon ran across town to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Justice White, and got him to show it to the rest of the Supreme Court justices and the leaders of Congress at one of the biggest hotel ballrooms in Washington, D.C., because the Chief Justice had been in the KKK and thought the message was just wonderful. So you can see how, the battle over these things was, front and center, and has a lot of parallels with the fight today.
And that was back when cancel culture lost, I guess, right? That's what I do find so fascinating, is that that's a perfect example of just, they didn't call it cancel culture, but one could argue that when you're promoting that type of vision of America as white nationalism, you're canceling a significant portion of the people living in the country, right?
Or another way to look at it is the cancel culture, a different cancel culture one, right? Because
that's what I mean. Exactly.
Being destroyed, they canceled the African American U.S. senators and the possibility of all of that. So
exactly my point. We've always had cancel cultures. We've always had cancel culture. It's just a question of who has the levers that are doing the canceling at any given time. And so let me ask you this, and I'm fascinated by this. What makes one story win when another loses?
Yeah, and how's the struggle of ideas happen, and how does one win and the other lose, and how do they get the upper hand? Those are all questions that I was really interested in writing the book, which is, because ideas are like the most powerful thing in the human experience and can affect our lives and the future of nations and everything else, but they're abstractions. And what makes them real is somebody comes up with the ideas. And it comes out of, their childhood, who their friends were, who their enemies were, what their formative experiences were. And when they clash with another set of ideas, they're clashing with another person or set of people's experiences and stuff. So I wanted to write the book and research the book through the key figures who ended up being the most high profile, warriors for each of these ideas. And so it's written as a multiple biography, like a novel with separate storylines of different people that end up colliding. And so you learn about who these people were and where they got their ideas and what their experiences were, and then how they intersect. And how in the 19th century, right, George Bancroft is born in 1800 and doesn't die until the 1890s. And the book doesn't end until sort of 1918 or so. But during that whole time period, much of it, the war of ideas took place in written word, in books and articles, but especially in public speeches. And the public speeches would be transcribed by reporters on the scene who would then publish them in the newspaper. And then, like a slow moving Twitter, they would get retweeted by other newspapers, right? They would get a copy of that paper, they would retypeset it into their edition and reprint the speech in their paper, sometimes with, scathing, commentary on top. And that was how things would in slow motion retweet across the country. People would counter comment on articles and issue counter speeches. And that's how, for much of the 19th century, that's where the battles of ideas and politics and everything else happened. And so understanding, how people got onto these stages and who their allies were that would do the retweeting and who would be their enemies who would fight against it and how it would affect government. People like Bancroft and Sims both, served in government. Sims as a legislator and almost as a U.S. senator, and his best friend was governor of South Carolina and later was a U.S. senator just before the Civil War. Bancroft served in cabinets as ambassadors and as the Democratic Party boss in Massachusetts and their gubernatorial, nominee. Woodrow Wilson becomes governor and president. Frederick Jackson Turner is the only one of the group that didn't serve in public office, but was the most famous, historian of the 19th century with this frontier thesis hit that people still talk about and still affects our pop culture. And Frederick Douglass became, one of the most famous international, celebrities of his time and served as our ambassador to Haiti and in other public positions in Washington, D.C. So they weren't just ivory tower individuals. They were also literally involved in statesmanship and statescraft at the same time. And so all of those things, the intersection between, politics and those with hold their hands on the literal levers of power, and these ideas was something I was very interested in, and watching it evolve as you get towards the end of the book, when you actually have motion pictures and other forms of media starting to form and the power over them and how it quickly, the very first blockbuster film leads to massive street clashes and protests of the sort that we just talked about, because everyone recognized its enormous power to shape people in the war of ideas.
But what was what were the historical contexts that led to the victory of that idea of ethno-nationalism at that time? So, for instance, as an analogy, right? Like, I think a lot of what we've seen in terms of cultural ideas gaining prominence in this era is, in some respect, a reaction to Donald Trump. I think I don't know that if Hillary Clinton was president, we would have had a Me Too movement like we've had. I don't know that we would have had the same disposition on what I believe we're on the cusp of a different understanding of immigration in this country as a function of a lot of people just lining up in this polarization. What in that era, and how much, I guess, does like the lost cause, another sort of narrative, sub-narrative, I guess, of our nation, play into that what was going on within the context of the material world that was allowing for that vision of an ethno-nationalism to win in that moment?
Right. I think that the end of the Civil War, everyone would have thought that the civic national vision had won. The one,
right.
President Lincoln, after meeting with Bancroft and Frederick Douglass a couple times in the White House during the war, and a lot of the thinkers associated with the movements that both of them were drawing from, ends up at Gettysburg declaring essentially that the Civil War is about defense of those civic national ideas and the idea of human equality, which the war hadn't started with. Lincoln hadn't started there, but by the end of it, that was what it appeared to be. And the the Reconstruction era amendments, the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments, that second founding of the United States, based on those principles, you would have thought it would have been the triumph of civic nationalism. Everyone kind of did, but then in those decades between the end of the Civil War and Woodrow Wilson's presidency, you're right, everything had shifted. And primarily, if you step way back and take the orbital perspective, the hundreds of thousands of lives lost in the Civil War, everyone in white America and in the white North who would have had to spearhead any effort to force the Confederacy to comply with this new vision, to force the occupied states via Reconstruction to become good civic nationalists and abandon, their schemes for an apartheid-like system to continue in the South. Those people were exhausted by it, in essence. And perhaps not enough of them were committed to begin with the idea that this was about defending civic nationalism as opposed to just, preventing the secession of the southern states. And so for all those reasons, there just lacked the political and perhaps the public will at the highest levels to push back against a violent, terrorist campaign in the occupied South to destroy Reconstruction. And because of that, the failure to be willing to put up with the continued sacrifices to do that, there needed to be a way that the North and South could come together on different terms. And so basically white Americans, North and South, agreed on a new narrative about what the Civil War was about. They would let go of the idea that it was about the ideals and Declaration of Independence. Oh, we both had honorable ideas, and blue and gray both suffered on the battlefield, and now we'll hug and have blue-gray marriages and nice plantation houses, all that movies that came out about the South afterwards that kind of feature that reconciliation. That's all built into parts of Birth of a Nation, by the way, as well, that whole idea. And that white Americans would be able to come together and reconcile by forgetting about the promise in the Declaration, about forgetting about the equality of humans beyond, what was tolerated in the definitions of the Confederate South. And so that all laid the stage for Woodrow Wilson to put the capstone on the South's winning the peace, having lost the war. And all of that, comes out of that period afterwards. Remember, Woodrow Wilson is a little kid during the Civil War. He's living in Columbia, South Carolina, after it's been burned down by Sherman when he's growing up. His father is, a raging white supremacist and the most important charismatic figure in the Presbyterian Church of the Confederacy. I mean, he's lived through all of that I just told you personally, and he brings all of that with him to his conquest of the White House. So that's, I think, at the orbital perspective, how it is that the shift between those two visions ended up laying the groundwork for the ethno-nationalist white supremacist version to dominate in the 1910s and 1920s.
That's fascinating. It had never occurred to me that just sense of exhaustion, and the South having a broadly speaking more stakes, I guess. I mean, that's why you get a myth like the Lost Cause, and there's no competing myth on some level about the North until maybe, I don't know, maybe that that competing myth is that Lincoln was that engaged in terms of slavery. But I think to a certain extent, he was, but I don't know if there was not a commensurate sort of counter volley to the Lost Cause.
I mean, it was there. This whole civic national tradition we're talking about, starting with Bancroft and promoted much more effectively, and with the awareness of our failures to achieve it, that Frederick Douglass pushed forward. I mean, there were people fighting for it the whole time, but the reason they lost the battle, they lost the hearts and minds war overall, is because of all those forces we're talking about. And their vision was to encompass the whole United States, not just the North per se, even though the northern regions or regional cultures that I described are the ones where that vision was strongest or most compatible with their founding ideas, ironically, since Jefferson was not from those areas. But that's why the ethno-nationalist version was able to win in that period, even when there was a competing idea. And those competing ideas were still there in the background. People were still fighting for them. That's why they were able to be the baton grabbed again in the aftermath of World War II, with the building of the civil rights movement that vanquished that white supremacist, toppled it from being the dominant idea and placed the civic national one at the top again. Even if we weren't achieving it, that was what we all thought the country was supposedly defined on. I'm a Generation Xer and grew up thinking that we're working towards the human equality, and that the bad old days of the Jim Crow South and segregation are past us. And lo and behold, we've elected an African American president, right? We're moving forward, and that was because that was the dominant ethos up until quite recently.
All right, so I can't let you go without just asking about your last work. And again, I'd recommend people go back and listen. It was in August of 2015, but it's the history of the 11 rival regional cultures of North America. And you have tracked those cultures in terms of the coronavirus response. sadly, federalism has been suspended, I guess, when it comes to pandemics. Not so much when it comes to protests, but when it comes to pandemics, we suspend it. How is that playing out? The different cultures in our country, defined by region, which ostensibly were defined by different groups of people congregating in specific. I mean, some measure of what they call self-sorting. How is that playing out here?
Right. If you know the map of the early colonization patterns in the United States, which areas were colonized from New England and became a greater New England, New Englanders and their descendants over generations in different tiers of the country, setting out the first, state constitutions and, narratives about who we're supposed to be and institutional ideas, as opposed to the Dutch settled area around New York City and not the rest of New York State, and the area that's descended from the Quakers project, William Penn's project in Pennsylvania, and covers another tier going out into the Midwest and the Appalachian backcountry and so on. If you know that map, it's shocking to see the fissures of those tectonic plates in, say, county level metrics of what's happening with the spread of the pandemic. And I've written on that and even crunched numbers. The regional cultures don't follow state lines because the settlement patterns didn't. So some states are riven by strong regional differences like Ohio or Pennsylvania or even Maryland, Texas, California. Different areas were settled by entirely different colonization streams, leading to massive differences. But you can see those differences on the map. And if you calculate the numbers, it follows pretty much what American nations would predict, because one of the biggest differences between these regional cultures is where they lie in the idea of how you create a free society. Do you do it through maximizing individual liberty, or do you maximize it then through protecting the common good and building a free society and the infrastructure you need to have humans be meaningfully free? In other words, do you maximize the autonomy of the individual, and that's what matters most to be free? Or do you perhaps not do that and invest in the common, structures that allow you to cultivate a republican citizenry? So those areas that are strongly on the individual liberty side, lo and behold, are the same areas where there's enormous resistance to wearing masks to protect others because it would somehow restrict your own freedom, where governors and other top officials have worked, to the advantage of the virus and against public health advice based on the idea that, people's economic and personal liberties should not be infringed, even in the face of a deadly virus. Whereas the areas that are more communitarian, where the ideas that you're building and protecting a free community, have been much more likely to follow public health advice, where mask wearing is largely regarded as a good thing and protecting the common good in each other, even if it's an inconvenience to yourself, takes precedence. And so the rates now in this second wave of virus, the first wave, it was essentially started in places that were well connected to China and northern Italy and also densely populated. And then those got under control and everyone was under control. And we could have been like, say, Canada, where we generally have the virus under control. But instead, we're having a second wave because in places with this individual liberty ethos, where you go have spring break and you have governors stopping cities from having mask ordinances and all the rest, you've seen the disease absolutely explode, even if as it remains under control in areas within, say, the greater New England space where those communitarian functions and ethos exist. And so that we're seeing the stark differences in our fundamental and existential characteristics of our federation playing out in the most morbid and awful way possible. And again, it could have been avoided with strong federal leadership,
right,
and a national strategies. But because the Trump administration abdicated responsibility and has left it all to the states, we're seeing this horrid, ghoulish laboratory of federalism, and watching how the different regional cultures would handle what is basically, a public health, common good narrative. And lo and behold, some of them do not handle such things very well at all.
Well, I just find it so fascinating, and that the idea of the sort of like cultural values of people who lived 200 years ago plus resonate in such an explicit way 200 years later with their grandkids.
Right. 200 and 400 years later. And, on the political map at the county level and in dialects and polling on different values and issues, it's staggering how much the inertia and legacy of culture can play out, even when the, original people, in quotes, who founded these places are long gone, or their descendants are a tiny minority. The inertia of having been the first ones to set out the ideas that the rest of us encountered later when we moved to a place is pretty amazing, and seems to be something about the way humans as social organisms work.
Yeah, I find it fascinating. We will link to one of those pieces, I think from the Press Herald at majority.fm, as we will too with Union, the struggle to forge the story of the United States nationhood. Colin Woodard, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. It's fascinating stuff.
Thanks so much. Enjoyed it at any time.
All right, bye-bye. All right, folks. I would recommend you go back and listen to his interview. I believe it was August 27th of 2015, about those 11 regional things. And you could also listen and or read about Deep Roots, how slavery still shapes the Southern politics, which also is another example of just how resonant and durable these cultural ideologies are. I don't know what better way to put it. Cultural ideas, values are generations later. And when you begin to understand that, so much of where we are today is a function of ideas that people had 1, 2, 3, 400 years ago. It's fascinating. It gives you a sense in many respects, what you're fighting against at different times, how deep these ideologies are within people. We're going to take a break, go into the fun half. This is one of those moments where I would say, become a member, join the majorityreport.com. I pitch, obviously, for justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Sign up for the AM Quickie at amquickie.com. We also have merch. Shop at shop.majorityreportradio.com. And this would be, the point in the show where I would plug Michael's show. I think tomorrow night they are going to, the TMBS crew is going to put together a memorial remembrance for Michael. But go back, watch some of the old shows, TMBS shows, and pass them around. There's a lot of stuff that Michael put out over the past couple of years, in particular, that our histories and will have as much relevance 5 years from now as they did over the past couple of years. So check that stuff out. And again, a reminder, if you have an idea of what some of Michael's best of interviews from the Majority Report over the years, ones that stuck with you, or moments, send us an email, majorityreporters@gmail.com, write for Michael in the subject line. We're going to, over the next month, run some of those in his memory on Thursdays, and and then we'll take it from there. But so check that out. Also, obviously, everybody has been doing remembrances of Michael. You can check out Nomiki's show, the Nomiki show on patreon.com and on youtube.com, the Nomiki show. Check that out. Also, the Antifada. Jamie, are you here?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep. Jamie, what do you guys have this week on the Antifada?
This week on the Antifada, we released an episode last Wednesday about housing. We talked to Nate Post-Cyborg of the Line Goes Down crew and Tank, Tenant and Neighborhood Councils, which is a pretty radical and militant tenant union out of the East Bay, about the ongoing housing crisis, how it's being accelerated by COVID, what tenants can do to fight back. We also talked about some fun little news items like the shady feds invading Portland, the dropping fertility rate, the Mary Trump interview, and the cancel culture letter. Also on Friday, Andy released an episode of Prolet Cult, his little side project about technology, conspiracy theories, space communism, etc. They talk about the meme wars and the role that internet memes can play in politics. And then this weekend, I just want to tease it, we recorded an episode on Hong Kong and the uprising there, and I was a little intimidated by the subject at first, but I know that Michael would have told me to go for it, so I did, and I'm stoked to release that on Wednesday.
Great. Not sure what's happening on Literary Hangover. Matt will be back tomorrow, and will update us on that. Jamie, I think you got to check we're going to cross over. Check your computer. I think your sound is coming through your computer and not through your microphone. So just check that in the go into your preferences on your computer and make sure you get the right input. All right, we're going to take a quick break. Head into the fun half. We'll see you in the fun half. 646-257-3920. We'll take some calls, take some IMs.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Homo says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Dannerky's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Dannerky.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
psych. Fuck 'em.
Homo says what?
What?
Homo says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black. African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck 'em.
Fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total
Pussy.
All right, we are back. Like I said, it's going to be weird for a while, maybe a long time. I don't know. Certainly not going to stop playing that interstitial music in some respects. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'll be even more reluctant to retire those things because so much of that the songs and interstitials like that and like the other one features Michael, but we're just going to power through it, and that's going to be part of it's going to be one more part of the show and our lives, and that's what it's going to be.
Yeah, Michael always loved the DJ Danarchy song, and now I can really see why. Most of the song was Michael.
Yes, exactly. Let me read this IM just because I want to get this out of the way. Look, there's going to be times where I know, like, some people might be offended by some of this stuff and this and that, but Michael, I think, would appreciate it, and so I'm going for it. God on the IM. Bad news, guys. I saw Michael playing tennis with John McCain yesterday and profusely apologizing for those blood clot jokes. That's right up on the line there, but I think Michael would definitely appreciate that. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. This is John from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. How are you, John?
I'm okay. How's my phone?
It's okay. You got to just back off it just a little bit.
Okay. So when I first started listening to this show, I was amazed by Michael's knowledge of foreign policy. One of his first shows I heard him do was on Wahhabism, and it was extremely informative. I know how much work you have to put in to be that knowledgeable about any subject, and Michael was very joyous in expressing his expertise. Fairly early on, I told him on the air how much I admired his dedication, and I always enjoyed his comments when I called in. Michael's humor was wild. So many of his impressions were based on complete reversals of the person he was imitating, like right-wing Mandela or Bernie or bust Bill Clinton. And I challenge anyone to name somebody who does a better Obama than Michael, because I haven't heard one. His Nation of Obama absolutely killed. So Sam, you and Michael were a great comedic team. Longtime listeners know Michael did an impression of me, and though he would occasionally imitate other callers, I'm honored that he imitated me more than any other caller. He did acknowledge that his impression was very similar to his Rand Paul. I want to reenact a conversation from that horrible election night on November 8th, 2016. And you and Michael just ended your conversation with the writer Guy Lawson, and Trump was surprising everybody, and anxiety was running rampant. Pardon my bad impressions of you and Michael. Sam, I want to call John from San Antonio. I'm also terrified. Michael laughing. I do not want to hear from John from San Antonio smart number crunching right now. That is not what I need, Sam. That's the thing. I'm not sure I want to hear it, but maybe we should check in. And then Michael doing his impression of me. And that locks it in. Donald Trump has won. Then I did a regression of when the world will end. And it looks like in the third year of the Trump presidency, there'll be an Armageddon and human life will cease to exist on the planet. So it's great to hear all the personal stories about how much Michael cared about his friends and acquaintances. Michael always fought for the oppressed and promoted human rights. His commitment to the Bernie campaign was inspiring. As a commentator, Michael just kept improving every year. I full-heartedly agree with you, Sam, that Michael's future was extremely bright. I truly believe that the left will eventually gain power in this country. Demographics back me up. And when that happens, I hope people will look at this period as the beginning of a new movement. I enjoy when the show posts old clips from the Air America days, and it's great to see people posting their favorite Michael Brooks clips on Twitter, and I'm looking forward to some of the Thursday shows. As time rolls on, I'm going to be reflecting on this era, and I'm going to be watching and listening to clips from this show, and on the Michael Brooks show to reminisce on these times and hear Michael's brilliant and hilarious mind. And as I said on Twitter, I'd give almost anything for him to do an impression of me, promoting a debate with Mike from PA. Anytime, any place, anywhere.
John,
you are deeply loved by thousands of people, and you will be deeply missed.
John, thanks for the call. Really good one. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Sam.
I got to say though, I think he might have impersonated Greg a little bit more than you. I'm not convinced of that, but I will certainly allow that to lie in dispute as to who he impersonated, which caller he impersonated the most. One of the things I said about the characters that he satirized, his characters would satirize two opposite propositions simultaneously, which I thought, it's brilliant satire. Bernie Bro Clinton satirized both a vision of Bernie Bros and the Clinton neoliberalism simultaneously. And that is a very hard thing to do. And particularly, it's not like he wrote this stuff out.
Don't vote for my wife.
Exactly. Exactly. Here is, let's just take a couple of clips here because we have, like I say, there are two major problems we have in this country at the moment. Well, we have more than two. We have two that are specifically of this moment. It is the failure of our federal government to even attempt to deal with the pandemic in any shape or form. And we also have the failure of the federal government to help people on an economic and financial and material way outside of the pandemic, but maybe as a result of the pandemic. And I'm talking just like in this specific moment. Obviously, we have some ongoing problems, but this is how demented the Republican Party has become about this. That, I think been quite clear on what the failures of the HEROES Act is. And in many respects, I mean, some of the stuff is atrocious, extension of COBRA. But with that said, there is an attempt to provide some type of relief to the American public. Some instances, we're going to do it through a Rube Goldberg machine that's only going to satisfy our corporate donors. But there is an attempt. Here's Ted Cruz basically thinking that, or stating that, an attempt to help Americans at this time when you're facing millions of people about to be evicted, millions of people who are about to have their unemployment cut in half, maybe more. Here's Ted Cruz saying that there's only one reason why you would want to help Americans in this situation.
Look, what we ought to focus on, instead of just shoveling trillions out the door, we ought to be passing a recovery bill. Now, what's a recovery bill? A recovery bill would be lifting the taxes and the regulations that are hammering small businesses so that people can go back to work. A recovery bill would suspend the
pause it for 1 second. What kind of, who does he think he's talking to? Who in the country thinks that the reason why small businesses are failing now is because of regulations?
Yeah, I mean, Sam, I know there was a lot going on last week, but there was a new study done by the NIH about COVID's response to bridge loans and cutting regulations and how the virus does under those conditions.
You can cut taxes all you want on a business, but if customers are not coming through the door and they don't have any money, there won't be any taxes to collect in the first place. You can cut all the regulations you want, but people aren't going to come through the door if they don't have any money and they're afraid of getting a disease, which could impact the rest of their life, if not end their life. But they will still repeat this trope. Go.
Taxes and the regulations that are hammering small businesses so that people can go back to work. A recovery bill would suspend the payroll tax, which would give a pay raise to everyone in America who's working. That actually gets people back to work.
Well, the Treasury Secretary said this morning that you could have 5, 6, 7 other bills coming along that include things like a payroll tax. But this time, unemployment in particular is something that he said needs to be extended. And according to our latest CBS poll, it's very popular. 74% of Republicans approve more stimulus and added benefits. 92% of Democrats, 82% of independents. So Republicans do have the burden of governing right now. Why aren't you on board with this?
I am on board with restarting the economy. What Democrats want to do, we're 100 days out from the presidential election. The only objective Democrats have is to defeat Donald Trump. And they've cynically decided the best way to defeat Donald Trump is shut down every business in America, shut down every school in America.
So, in other words, he's saying that if you give people unemployment money, everything's going to shut down, and that's going to defeat Donald Trump. The idea, first off, I don't like a payroll tax because what you're doing is you're underfunding Social Security down the road. And you're trying to make that unstable, and you're basically leading to cuts to it. But even if I didn't have that issue with the payroll tax, why doesn't a payroll tax work in this situation? Because people are not making a payroll. Small businesses don't have the ability to provide a payroll, and would-be employees are not getting pay because there's no job. The idea that you can force people back into work does not mean that they're going to have work to do. The idea, or that the business is going to have money to pay them. It is insanity. I don't even understand it. If they're so convinced that that providing unemployment insurance is going to help the Democrats, why don't they do it too?
Exactly.
I mean, there is some sense in which this idea of Ted Cruz's holds true to its own internal logic, right? They're trying to force people to go back to work by refusing to extend any sort of benefits where they get paid to stay home. And in this environment, in this economy, what kinds of jobs are they going to get? It's not that there's no jobs, it's that they are really crappy jobs, right? Like Amazon just went on a huge ass hiring spree, and the less welfare, the less of a safety net that people have, the less power they're going to have to refuse bad jobs and agitate for better conditions on the jobs that are still available.
Yes, I would agree. That part of the internal logic makes sense. But the problem is that it is a very narrow perspective, because Amazon could have more people working there. But the bottom line is, it's like, there's not going to be an increase in demand. I mean, I guess maybe some of those Amazon workers will turn around and buy something from Amazon. But the problem is that, yes, it is an enticement to jump over the cliff. But the problem is that, like, getting people to jump over the cliff is not going to deal with the fundamental problem that we have, which is there's a pandemic going on and people are not going to go into look, they're not going to go into a restaurant to eat if they're worried about getting COVID. And so this, I think there is there's clearly an internal logic. Like if we can starve people and not provide them any sustenance, they're going to have to go back to work. But that's not going to protect them from getting COVID. And that's not going to protect the customers from getting it. And they're not going to come in. I mean, that's what's so insane about this is that we played a clip at the beginning of the show where Chris Wallace is basically saying to Mnuchin, like, and Mnuchin himself says it worked. All the stimulus money that we pumped out in the spring worked. Well, then why are you stopping? Because nothing's changed. It's not like the disease picked up and packed up and walked away. It's just insanity. They are the idea that the Senate just went on vacation and not dealing with this stuff. It's lunacy.
Well, if you can ignore the fact that the disease is still existing and doing its thing, it makes perfect sense.
Exactly. That's I find it difficult to do. Maybe it's just watching people with the masks, and maybe that's the problem with the masks. It makes it harder to ignore the fact that there is a pandemic going on.
Yeah, too much negativity.
Folks, we've got to
positive mental attitude.
Exactly, you got to actualize a little bit more. Here is so let's turn for a moment to the other problem that we have, which is that the federal government, now we understand states cannot print their own money. The federal government can. States have limited resources in which to derive revenue. Sales tax is a big part of it. When there's not a lot of business going on, they don't have a lot of revenue. We are seeing draconian cuts on the state level, city levels, schools, workers across the board, healthcare across the board. The federal government is the only entity positioned to provide a cohesive response to coronavirus. There are things at this point that the federal government could be doing in terms of enhancing the capacity of testing sites that are now overrun, where you have tests that are taking 4, 5, 6, 7, 14 days to come back. You take a test and the results don't come back for 14 days. It is explicitly of zero value to you. Zero value. It is completely irrelevant. It is like saying, it's like having to go to the bathroom and having someone tell you, oh, well, you passed a public rest stop 700 miles back that way. No value whatsoever. Here is testing czar, and I think he's lost his title, testing czar. I think he was like, that title was rescinded, I don't know, like a month and a half ago, because they decided we're not going to do anything in terms of testing. Brett Giroir, he's the Admiral Brett Giroir. He is out there. He's being asked why Donald Trump has not used the Defense Production Act to improve the testing turnaround.
The administration has invoked the Defense Production Act. True. They have done so for swabs, to get N95 masks, to get ventilators. Accurate. Has the Trump administration, has the president invoked the DPA to get labs up to speed, lab hiring and lab equipment? And you don't even need to do the DPA to do that for federal labs. That's what I'm talking about. There seems to be this reluctance to push the president to do what he needs to do to get the testing up to speed. I know that he's under the misguided impression that more testing is bad and makes him look bad, which, as you know, is completely false. And I'm wondering if you and others are just afraid to do this because you don't want to upset him. afraid to ask him to do what he needs to do to invoke the DPA, to force the federal labs to get up to speed to where we need to be so that we can isolate the virus. As you know, when you say people who need a test can get a test, there's a huge percentage of people who have the coronavirus who are asymptomatic, and they, quote unquote, don't need to be tested according to this standard. But the point is, in order to identify and isolate the virus, it needs to be much more widespread, the testing, so we can see people who are carriers who don't have symptoms. That's the point. Are you afraid to bring this up to President Trump because it will upset him?
So Jake, there's about 6 different things that you said in there, and let me unpack it a little bit. But let me start with the first premise. Everyone in the administration understands the importance of testing. Nobody in the task force is afraid to bring up anything either to the vice president or the president. Every time I've met with the president, he's been listening to all the data. He assesses.
I don't want to parse this that much, but when he says no one's afraid to bring up something to the vice president, or either the vice president or the president. So I think maybe like they'll say to the vice president, but they're afraid to do it to the president. That's sort of the sense I'm getting. But go ahead. It's a little premise.
Everyone in the administration understands the importance of testing. Nobody in the task force is afraid to bring up anything either to the vice president or the president. Every time I've met with the president, he's been listening to all the data. He assesses that. He understands it. I meet with the vice president almost every single day. No one is trying to stop testing in this country. No one has ever told me to do that. In fact, we want more. We want better. We want quicker. So let me just put that to rest right there. Secondly, we look for every opportunity to invoke the DPA. Now, the DPA isn't a magic tool. It doesn't violate the laws of physics. You can't create something out of nothing. Most companies do not need DPA on them because, number one, they are highly motivated to stop the pandemic. Number two, they have the private capital investment in order to expand their operations.
It's unbelievable. They're not doing it.
Isn't that inspiring?
You need to be going out. The federal government needs to be training or redeploying lab technicians who can go in and work on this stuff. Federal government needs to be providing things like reagents and whatever it is, like swabs or whatever it is. And that is the problem. They're two distinct problems. And they need to be going in there and making sure it happens, or creating government labs for that matter. I mean, I understand how long it takes to build a lab, but you have virtually an endless supply of money and every single possible reason in the world to spend it on this. Do you know that there is not a single app, not a single contact tracing app that exists by the states around the country? It is just insanity, the response to this. It's insanity.
Well, the Republicans represent the portion of capital that is not very forward-looking, shall we say?
Exactly.
It only understands profits in the immediate tense, the same sector that wants to lift all environmental regulations. And the Democrats maybe represent the slightly further looking segment of capital that says you can't have an economy if everyone's dead.
I'm not even sure. Like, I really do wonder if there is even an internal logic to this. Like, if it isn't just literally insanity. Like, okay, here's an example. All right. I think that for example, in the HEROES Act, the idea that you would extend COBRA or that you would subsidize COBRA as a way of dealing with health insurance issues for Americans as opposed to give them Medicare. That is a prime example of the leadership of the Democratic Party kowtowing to corporate interests, to capitalist interests. Perfect example of that. The idea that you would not have contact tracing, like you would basically send the message to the states, like, we're not going to help you with that. Like, I mean, I can imagine, like, you could say, like, this is a great way to fill our corporate cronies' pockets with contact tracing. Like, I think the reason why you wouldn't have that could very well come down to literally insanity, that the president is just out of his freaking mind. And here's an example of what I'm talking about. This is Jesse Waters. Now, I understand why Jesse Waters pushes this, because he puts money in his pocket if he becomes the champion of QAnon and putting it out on television, right? Like, I understand Jesse Waters in this. He's a scumbag who just cares about enriching himself. But the problem is the president watches this show. And here is Jesse Waters talking up QAnon, which is a full-blown, I don't know, just like fan fiction. Here we go.
Funny business now, Q, I guess this conspiracy deal on the internet, Twitter's basically just cracked down, eliminated about 7,000 accounts, 150 other 100,000 accounts are now in the crosshairs. Do you think that this is an attempt to kind of interfere in an election? Because Q can do some crazy stuff with the pizza stuff and the Wayfair stuff, but they've also uncovered a lot of great stuff when it comes to Epstein and it comes to the deep state. I never saw Q as dangerous as Antifa, but Antifa gets to run wild on the internet. What do you think of what's going on there?
Yeah, guess what? Adam Schiff does a lot of crazy things, and Jerry Nadler and Derek Swalwell. They also do a lot of crazy stuff. Here's the fundamental problem, Jesse, that I have with it. You have some little dweeb in Silicon Valley, right, who's 22 years old. He's a tech savant, right? He's there. He's running, Twitter or one of these companies. And he literally has his finger on the power of a presidential election, because you know what? Not everybody can afford to have cable news. Not everybody, can watch Fox. And guess what? You've got 100 million people in the country walking around with an iPhone or, with some other device, right? Actually, probably more than that. But
so according to Eric Trump, QAnon is like the news. And according to Jesse Waters, the pizza thing where they thought there was a, child sex ring under a pizza place, someone and shoot it up. Okay, that, and a couple of the Wayfair thing where they thought that a online furniture store was running a sex ring based upon special names for their bureaus. Yeah, okay, they got that wrong, but they get a lot of stuff right. The president's watching this. The president's son's sitting there complaining like they're, folks are being denied their news source because you're not finding out that when Wayfair sells a Lauren, it's not actually a human being. It's the name of a bureau or something.
I don't know. There might be some kids in those drawers. Have you checked?
I mean, it's God, man. It is just unbelievable. Like, if there was a properly functioning FCC, now I know I guess Fox News is, I guess presumably it's a broadcast. I guess it's a cable station. So maybe technically the FCC doesn't have any jurisdiction over it. But how do you, this is where the idea well, it'll be cancel culture if you told the advertisers not to support Jesse Waters going out there and saying that Q get some stuff right. The thing with Antifa, the idea that he may perceive Antifa as more dangerous than Q, although I don't think that's the case.
I wish Antifa had people winning primaries in blue districts.
We have at least a half a dozen Q supporters who have won the Republican primary, but Antifa is not based on false narratives. They're out there. In certain instances, they're fighting against police violence. They are protesting fascists. But they're out there saying there's secret things going on that and we should be you should be going into pizza parlors looking for I don't know, boxes sent by Wayfair to see if there's children in them. I mean, this is it's insanity.
Well, you can't be alienating the QAnon people because that's a growing, ever-growing portion of the Trump base.
And also, apparently, for Jesse Waters, it's a way he's going to juice his ratings. It's pretty shocking. Here's something that you probably didn't know, Jamie. Politics, which is where the mechanism in which a society determines who is going to get what benefits from the collective, right? I mean, that's basically what it is. It is various people negotiating, how we're going to slice up the pie that comes from, and the pie being the benefits of coming together as a society. There's obviously benefits for that. Human beings have been coming together in some form or another as a community for a long, long time. Hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps, or tens of thousands of years. And our beings have been coming together. But Ben Shapiro has a slightly different take on politics, wherein the idea that you would have an understanding of what other people are going through, known as empathy, is a bad thing to mix with your politics.
Okay, there's only one problem. Okay, empathy is actually kind of bad for politics. The reason that empathy is bad for politics is because it leads you to empathize with people that you are more likely to like, as opposed to people you don't like. Okay, so first of all, the pitch for empathy is actually, there have been several books that are written on this, social science books, talking about how empathy is not actually the best thing for politics. It actually almost deactivates the reasoning centers of your brain. Because when you're empathetic, you don't actually create good policy. This doesn't mean that feeling sympathy for people is a bad thing. It means that if empathy is what drives your policy making, you're probably not acting in a rational fashion. But the real goal here is, of course, not to generate empathy. The real goal here is to suggest that if you disagree with the idea that America is systemically and institutionally racist, you are not an empathetic person, and therefore you're a bad, cruel, and callous person. Right? The idea is that empathy is really about, it's really a moral statement about what kind of good person you are. And you can't watch baseball until you say it along with Morgan Freeman. You can't. You can't just watch a game and be distracted, which is the goal of sports.
The sports bus, I can't quite gather. But yes, if you lack empathy, and I think if you aggressively attempt to strip yourself of empathy or the world of empathy, you are what is known as a sociopath. You are someone who is not concerned with the humanity or the feelings of another. And his argument is that if you try to understand and acknowledge the feelings of another or how people are reacting or their situation, this is going to inhibit your ability to create policy. But what is the goal of policy here?
It's to be the most logical society ever created by man. I'm talking really fast.
But what is the goal of policy if not to help people? I mean, maybe it's just like for him, policy must only help him. Ben Shapiro. That is the definition of
empathy
policy.
does not help my policy, is what Ben Shapiro is arguing.
That's right.
Here.
You're being really emotional right now. I think you guys need to calm down and think about this rationally.
I'm being a little bit hysterical, I understand. But the idea that you would attempt to fashion policy with a specific attempt to ignore the experience of other human beings is fascinating. I mean, I guess if you were, I'm trying to think of like what kind of policy in which that would work. Like, I don't know, like maybe how a dam functions or something very highly mechanical. But then you would also, I don't know what the policy would be because you're really concerned about like, hey, this could prevent people from having water. People like to have water. Or like, what does it feel like to live in a situation where you don't have access to water? I mean, he is promoting sociopathy as a mechanism to help society?
Well, he wants to have it both ways, though, because he kind of moves the goalpost towards the end, right? He's arguing that empathy should not play a role in policy, right? Because it's not logical. And then he says, just because people are making policy without empathy doesn't mean that they're not empathetic. Like, he wants to do the sociopathic policies and then not have people
criticized,
call him a bad person.
Yes, play the last part of that, because he was saying like, oh, if you don't care about people being subject to racism, then you're not empathetic. Yeah.
Is to suggest that if you disagree with the idea that America is systemically and institutionally racist, you are not an empathetic person, and therefore you're a bad, cruel, and callous person.
All right, pause it for 1 second.
The idea.
So he said, if you disagree with the idea that there is not systemic racism in this country, then you are not an empathetic person. So if you, and let's, what are examples of systemic racism? I guess, one of them might be policing. Like, if you disagree with the idea that being stopped and frisked, let's say, simply because you are between the age of 12 and 24 and you're a black man or boy, and you're being frisked every time you walk out of your house because you are that thing. If you don't perceive that as a systemic racism, then for some reason, all of a sudden, you can't understand the feelings of people, of other people who are not like you. If you don't understand that being stopped in a vehicle that is in any way a nice car simply because you're black, then you can't understand, then supposedly you're not empathetic because you don't appreciate that. If you can't understand that people that black people are saying, like, you have no idea what I deal with all the time. You can't understand what it feels like in any way to deal with this on a daily basis, then you're not empathetic suddenly.
Well, he's saying that some people believe that stuff isn't real, but that doesn't mean that those people are not empathetic. It's just a difference of opinion.
It's just a difference of opinion. Like, I totally think that your feelings are unwarranted and not valid. And just because of that, you say that I'm not empathetic? Just finish it out. Let's see what he says. Oh, sound. Try that one more time.
But the real goal here is, of course, not to generate empathy. The real goal here is to suggest that if you disagree with the idea that America is systemically and institutionally racist, you are not an empathetic person, and therefore you're a bad, cruel, and callous person. Right? The idea is that empathy is really it's really a moral statement about what kind of good person you are. And you can't watch baseball until you say it along with Morgan Freeman. You can't. You can't just watch a game and be distracted, which is the goal of sports.
Well, I think if you are you are not an empathetic person, I think that there is, I don't know if that necessarily makes you a bad person, because I think there are people who are neurologically predisposed to not being able to have empathy for other people. But it definitely makes you a person that I think should not be opining on what is best for society, and not someone I want in charge of setting policy for millions of people, because, there are other things that you can do, but that would be one thing that I would say, stay away from that. Because if you don't have the ability to in any way even imagine yourself in the shoes of another person, or even be aware that someone in another shoes have a set of feelings that may be just as valid as yours, or experiences that may be just as valid as yours, but different, then I really think that you should be involved in something that is a little bit more narrow.
Yeah. This reminds me, I heard from somebody once who told me that they were a libertarian until they did Molly for the first time and realized that other people have feelings. I feel like that might do Benny a bit of good.
That would.
I don't want to be around for it, but
I would definitely want to be around for that. I think that would be the only thing I would ever want to be around for regarding that guy.
You think it would make him talk faster or slower?
I have no idea. I don't know.
Oh my God, my face is melting. I love everyone so much. Give me a hug.
Dave Rubin, I'll bake you a cake, all right?
Jonathan Armstead. Sam, I didn't IM during the tribute show because I felt whatever I said about Michael would be inadequate. But my suggestion for folks in the community to help continue his legacy is to tell your kids about him. He loved telling stories and young people, and whether it was talking about Mila singing or teaching Saul how to fake yawn when getting yelled at by you. But he also loved covering kids who resisted the horrors in the world. If we can inspire another young person to egg a racist politician because of him, it'll be worth it. You know, one of the things that I didn't have, I spoke against, I spoke at his memorial, and I forgot to tell the story. And I just reminded Mila of this. One day, Mila came into the office in the fashion district office, the closet that we were in, the dust closet, essentially. And she came in there, and she must have been, I don't know, 5, 6. It couldn't have been much older than that, 7 maybe. I don't know how old she was. And she came in. She met Michael. She met Matt. Maybe she had met them before, once before. And she's about to leave. I think she was with her babysitter, maybe. I can't remember exactly because I wasn't going with her. Maybe her aunt. And she just looked at both of them and said, "Bye, ladies." And what? And they both were hysterically laughing. But he remembered that, I think, I would imagine, till the day died. I mean, he was... that he thought was the greatest. I was still very, very proud of her.
She sensed their soy boy energy.
Yes, there was something just hilarious about it. And I've asked her, I said, why did you say that? She goes, I don't know. Be silly. Hey guys, just wanted to share a lighter moment. I was tearing up during last week's show, listening to so many friends of the show paying tribute to Michael. Then I imagine John from San Antonio calling and going straight into asking Sam if he had seen the most recent Quinnipiac poll showing movement in the North Carolina's governor's race. And then I imagine Michael laughing at that. Love you guys. Yeah, when I was trying to write what I was going to say, and I ended up chucking it at the last minute, the whole speech. But every moment I was writing it, I could imagine him mocking me about something. So yes, I hear that too. Colin from Nebraska went to a protest in Omaha this past Saturday, left before the 150 people got arrested. One of my friends got arrested. The Omaha World Herald article said it leaned toward the potential of getting violent. There was no violence, so the police arrested people on the suspicion of them doing something violent. Unbelievable. Congressional baseball fans, so the Miami Marlins, talk about a real fish in a barrel situation. 15 of the Marlins have been announced as having COVID, apparently. So much for baseball being effective. Ronald Reagan. Ben Shapiro, the case against grieving. Jerem McLean, I'm happy to be your newest member today. Been meaning to for a couple years, but now Michael's on our rest in power. I will do one of these. Maybe we should get I should get a Michael laughter on my board. Something like that would be pretty good, actually. Mm-hmm. Someone wants to send me an MP3 of Michael's laughter at majorityreporters@gmail.com. That would be great. A Square. Sam, please don't stop playing that for now. Thanks for the remembrance last week. Can't imagine how hard that was. But it was so helpful and a balm to hear the community get together virtually. Thanks for bringing Joshua. We will miss him so. He had just hit his stride on TMBS. So glad you all met and let him shine. We'll try and call on 8/13, that of Michael's birthday. For me, that day, I would love to hear you and him playing Founding Fathers, talking about Ben Carson. One of my favorite bits. I forgot about that. If you know when that was, that would be great. Founding Fathers. I remember that. Oh, jeez. Founding Fathers probably wouldn't have been too excited about Ben Carson. My goodness. A brain surgeon, really? Oh, do tell. I think not. Now, fetch us some tea. Calling from a 215 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Brian from California.
Brian from California. What's on your mind?
I was just calling one to express my condolences. I'm really sorry for your guys' loss.
Thank you.
And the second thing is I wanted to make a demand.
Okay.
I think in Michael's memory that it's time for you to restore his free speech and release that video where he made the argument that Dave Rubin is a professional idiot.
I think that's a very, very good suggestion.
I'm really glad you're doing this. I won't have to go to the protest now. I was going to organize a protest on the MR building if you refuse.
We got to figure out where that is, where that video is, but we will look for it. If anybody has any idea when the date is of that, I know it's so long ago, but yes, I think that is a fair tribute, and we will release that. Good idea, Brian. Appreciate the call.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Just talking about ideas. It's just talking about ideas.
Ideas.
Calling from a 610 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
I think this is me, Nick from PA.
Nick from PA. What's on your mind, Nick?
As well, just like the last caller, I just wanted to send my sympathies, condolences to all of you. It's definitely been a hard enough week for, people in the community, but nothing like, whatever you all are going through. It's a sad loss. It's a sudden loss. And I've just been glad of what everyone has been doing to try to push on Michael's legacy in, various different ways.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Nick. Thanks for the call.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Calling from a 308 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Kowalski from Nebraska.
Kowalski from Nebraska. What's on your mind?
Hey, so much. So anyways, I felt very offended at you guys going after Ted Cruz like that. I mean, don't you know that it helps the economy when you throw arson in the river? I mean, you got to deregulate. We
got to deregulate. It's these businesses, they're being completely overrun by regulation, these small businesses, of course.
Yes, exactly. That feels like a good right-wing Mandela impression, and if I was capable of doing impressions, I would, but frankly, I can barely use my own voice at the moment. Very fun last week, I think, for everybody with, Michael's passing, 1,000 deaths per day. And now, to top things off for at least me, COVID got into my household, and I've had a fever for the last 24 hours.
Oh,
so,
jeez.
Baller.
And
but I'll probably be fine, mild symptoms at worst, so.
All right. Well, take care of yourself. Do you have an oximeter?
What do you mean?
An oximeter is a device. It's about $25. And what you do is you put your finger in it and it tells you your blood oxygen level. It's very easy to do. Doesn't involve any pricking or anything like that. And one of the dangers of COVID, they're finding that it's less of a respiratory disease more of a vascular one. And it is conceivable that you can have diminished oxygen in your blood and not be aware of it for some time. And that if it gets to a certain threshold, you could be in real trouble. So I would see if you.
Thanks for the anxiety, Sam.
Well,
I'm just.
I know. I don't mean to spread anxiety about it, but if you have the ability to get an oximeter, it's a good thing to just keep an eye on that.
All right, I'll probably go grab one this evening or send my brother to go after one for me. But before I go, I do want to just say how, since I didn't get the ability to express this to Michael and just knowing what the world is at the moment, I do want to just sincerely express how much you guys have helped shape a lot of my views in the last year and a half since I've been listening to you regularly. I do think the work you're doing is very, very good and is leaving a positive impact on the world. And you guys rock, and I'm glad I'm a member of your guys' community and support you in what little ways that I can. So I just want to leave you on that. So thank you guys.
Kowalski, thank you. Take care of yourself, please. One of the things that has been amazing has been we've received so many emails of the influence that Michael had on people's lives through the show, obviously, and through TMBS as well. It is really, it's gratifying in that respect. So,
yeah,
and it's going to be. Go ahead.
I've heard from so many people who said that Michael pulled them out of the alt-right or the IDW or the new atheist movement or all kinds of bad pathways.
Yep. Seen a lot of those. Calling from a 713 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Is this me?
Yes.
Hey, Sam. This is Will in Houston. Wanted to say, really miss Michael. Miss Michael. But I forgot that I'm not in Houston anymore. I'm in Austin, and I wanted to give a little update on the shooting. I know you covered it on the weekend update, or on the
quickie, yeah,
on your morning update. Yeah. So the guy that got shot, his name was Garrett Foster, and he'd been in a relationship with a black woman for 10 years since high school. And she'd gone into sepsis and had to have all 4 of her extremities removed. And he'd been pushing her around at these protests, coming almost every single day. And the reason that he was carrying a gun was exactly a month ago on June 26th. A cop's son drove through our protest right next to APD and brandished a gun at us. And he did get taken away by the cops that day, but 15 minutes later he got released. And so ever since then, he's been open carrying and has been very safe up until that Saturday. I left Saturday a little bit, about an hour and a half before he got shot. And I was at the vigil last night. Everyone's tensions were high, but people at Cole rolled by, but we're getting more and more organized down here in Austin, and we're getting better and better with traffic control. I think that the tempo had died down here and people were getting lax. Usually we've got bike patrol that are keeping the traffic in line. So it's just heartbreaking to see what's happened here. And just wanted to give you all an update on the situation.
And to be clear, so that people know who may not be aware of this story, a car sort of waded into the protests, and my understanding is he went there just to see what was going on because of his past experience, like you said, and the driver in the car pulled out their handgun and shot him. And I don't believe they're pressing charges on the driver. Is that right?
No, they're not. That's correct. Since his mom went on Good Morning America, the cops put out his name, but what happened is the protest was coming up to 4th and Congress, going down Congress, and he was on 4th. He was going as fast as you could, well, not as fast as you could go, probably around 30 miles an hour, faster than you're really supposed to be going downtown in any case. And he turned right into the protest, didn't seem to stop until he hit a barricade. And from what I've heard, Garrett and Whitney were both rather close to the car, and Garrett was trying to protect his fiance. And so he approached and he had his hands on his gun, but not pointing at anyone. And apparently the driver took his handgun out and shot 5 times at Garrett, hitting him 3 times. And then a medic in the crowd pulled out his concealed handgun and shot back at the car as it drove away. And the cops are saying that Garrett pointed his gun at the driver because the driver gave that statement to the police after everything happened. So the cops are just saying what the shooter said. There's no video footage of Garrett pointing his gun. It's just the cops are trying to smear protesters as best as they can.
And to be clear, there's no video of the incident. It's not that the video doesn't show, it's that there is no video of the incident.
So there's a dash cam video that I've seen footage of that shows the car clearly turning protesters. And I've seen at least an image on a right-wing website showing Garrett in front of the car with his hands on his gun, but it's down, it's not pointed up at anyone. And they're trying to smear him, saying that he was pointing it at the guy, but it's not what it's showing. They're just lying.
Ugh. All right, man. Well, I appreciate the call, and hang in there and keep us updated.
Solidarity to all y'all in Brooklyn. Keep up the fight, guys. Michael wouldn't have wanted us to have it any other way.
That's definitely true. Appreciate it, Will. Hey. Calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
This is Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan.
How's it going? Oh, that was a bad question.
Right.
I thought of something I would have definitely run by Michael, which is Ben Shapiro just slowly getting more and more sociopathic. So like in 6 months, he's like, this is the case for strangling prostitutes. And I think Michael could have had some fun with that. So the last time I spoke to Michael, he was talking about traveling for work and pleasure. And I told him that he should do I proposed sort of a Rick Steves, Michael Brooks character. Do you know Rick Steves?
No.
He's like a dorky guidebook writer, kind of like if Ned Flanders did a travel show on PBS kind of thing.
Okay.
So anyway, the premise is Michael goes to some killing field in a far off country, but and teases that, but then throws to a segment on the local breakfast place or something. And he'd be wearing pleated slacks and a tucked in polo with a fanny pack. So anyways, he thought it was funny. And this weekend, I've been just trying to think of Michael and his fanny pack, traveling the world, going through segments for his show. What else? Oh, I was going to ask you on the app. I'm not seeing the archive. I don't know if it's.
Are you logged in?
Log out, or I think so. Well, yeah. I'll send you an email about that. But
okay. Yes, thank you. This is not the helpline.
And then, right. The last thing I wanted to say, I was trying to think of a fitting tribute for Michael, and I set cucknation.org to forward to his website. So if people want to get his book or merch from his show, and they're confused about where to go or the website, they can just go to cucknation.org.
That is
And,
very, very sweet of you. I know that Michael would have appreciated the redirect Cuck Nation to his site. Yes.
Yeah, he'd probably be mad that I didn't do it earlier, but
I'm quite surprised, frankly, that he hadn't texted you to that effect.
exactly. I did want to say just real quick before I go, a lot of people have been saying they're almost surprised at the level of grief they're feeling for somebody they didn't know, and people have been referring to the MR family. And I do think what you do is so important because a lot of us live on ideological islands in terms of either we live in communities that are very conservative, or we don't have a lot of friends or family that are maybe interested in politics or that share our politics. And so I thought it was so awesome that that you did the memorial. You deserve that thing like 4 hours without any issues other than Andy Kendler in the wrong room needed to sit closer to his router. But other than that, it was perfect. But I thought it was awesome how there was Bhaskar, the editor of a socialist magazine, and then Mindy, who, has different politics and is coming from all of this from a totally different place. But they both, found a space within the MR universe and had a lot of love and affection for Michael. And that's something I'm thinking a lot about. What can we do to sort of foster a community that's more, where we don't abandon our principles, but we're more welcoming. And
yeah.
So thanks for doing what you do, and we love and appreciate you and the show. So thanks.
Well, Ronald Reagan, you were definitely one of Michael's, top 10, 15 callers. So appreciate you calling in. That Cook Nation redirect is very, very sweet. He would definitely enjoy that. Psychopathic troll. My heart is in recovery mode after all these high-level tragedies. Teacher Dan, did you see Amanpour's recent interview of Sanders? She rubs 2016 in his face again. Will you be better at telling your supporters what to do this time, Tone? P.S. I'll miss Mike. He was the historian foil to Jamie's burn the mother down, and your come on, invite Warren in. Vampires aren't that bad, at least not as bad as the Republicans. Indeed.
Vampires are cool. Keep their name out of Warren's mouth.
The alpha males are back. Hey, it's been a hot minute since we had this one in the break. Jerry, a question mostly for Matt, but related to the end of your conversation today. Matt's not there, but maybe you can pass along. In Literary Hangover, you spent a lot of time on Yankee literature related to modern attitudes. Have you done or plan to do any similar work from colonial Southern Dutch Quaker literature from Jerry in Lyon, France? Brendan, will you write that question down?
Yes.
Thank you. I may not be able to remember that. Tomcat.
It's recorded,
hi guys.
too.
Still haven't gotten used to the fact that we won't get to listen to Michael on TMBS tomorrow night or ever again. Only recently finished his book and never got to tell him that he did well on it, and I was looking forward to what he had planned next. Really wanted to meet him at a live TMBS show at the UK at some point. He really introduced us to a lot of different people, political movements, and new countries and new ways of thinking. Missing you already, Brooksy. Peace, love, and tracksuits. Trey from Maryland in Pittsburgh. 100% defer to you and the crew's thoughts regarding what Michael would want as opposed to thoughts from us in the audience. You guys actually had a relationship with him, and anyone in the audience trying to be offended on his behalf didn't understand him at all. Love you guys, left his best. Look, I'm not, we haven't gotten anything from the people in that regard. I suspect there aren't, but it's not impossible for me to imagine there are some people who are like, hey, you shouldn't joke about someone who has passed. And I don't have a problem with people feeling that way, but I think something like having Cuck Nation forwarded to TMBS, I think, is something that he would appreciate. So Patrick from Kansas City ordered a copy of Michael's book. Have you guys thought of getting some falls together to do an audiobook version in memorial? Oh, that's an interesting idea. Tim Pulitzer. Not that the anti-mask position ever made sense, but now that almost all major corporations require them in stores, they have no choice if they want to freely participate in society. All they accomplished was letting the virus run through the country, which means things like schools, sports, etc. are now in jeopardy. Conservatism is starting to make me hate people. Yeah, the mask thing is just absolutely nuts. New member, love you and everyone. Been heartbroken since Monday. Been listening for 1 year to MR and only now realize how deep my love for all of you runs. I can't wait to carry forward Michael's. Tears keep coming. Solidarity, left is best. Thank you. Assy McGee, I want to say sorry to the audience and Michael for saying it was nice that Michael wasn't there interrupting Jamie. Man, I'm going to miss him. Making extremely complicated thoughts halfway through everyone else's thoughts. Tick from Chicago. Hey, Sam, it's nice to have you guys back. Hope you're all doing all right. Do you think you guys could have some Chicago-based progressive podcasters on the show sometime, like Ergo? You seem to have a fairly large audience here, and I think it would be great to bridge the two communities. Send an email. I got to be honest with you. I'm not familiar with any. I'm not familiar with a lot of different people, but one of the things that I'm committed to is trying to bring on more voices from across the spectrum of what we have here on, we offer on the show. One of the things that I fairly or unfairly, you don't need permission for these things, saw Michael's show as extending my project on some level. And, that's part of it, right? Like you plant some seeds, you put a little water, and then the things take the life of their own, but you anticipate, those things spreading. And that's part of, always on Air America, what, I one of the things that we would judge our success on was like how much success people that we would platform on the show would have. That was one of the agendas. And, one of the things that early on in this iteration of the show that was, I don't want to say frustrating, but an adjustment was like realizing like, okay, we cannot push a book to number one on the charts or number two on the charts like we could when you had, hundreds of thousands, if not millions. I mean, frankly, we were on in New York and LA and Chicago and Miami and Dallas and, we had a reach of millions of people on AM radio. First started doing a podcast, there was, podcasts weren't even a thing per se, particularly not a daily, live streaming show. It just was not, they existed, but it wasn't really a business in any way. And we didn't have the influence. And so we sort of adjusted what the metrics were for, success. And ultimately part of that was like, how many different shows can we support or birth or whatever it is in a myriad of different ways. Now this is like an industry on some level. And so, the metrics change again, but we're going to be looking to do stuff like that. So send an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. And I've just got to, reconfigure how from just a sort of time management type perspective, how we can sort of like add that feature, and we'll see. Definitely not Ivan. Who knew Michael would have been able to call out sick indefinitely? Angel, the Australian, I just need to say that John from San Antonio did a brilliant job. And I'll also use this opportunity to say that the WDYM tribute to Michael will be up soon. I just wanted to get that, the portrait I'm painting of him perfect. Sending my love to you all. Rest in power, Michael. Great. Andrew in Olympia. Just want folks to remember that grief is not a linear process. Doesn't look the same for everyone. Looking forward to working through this together. Love you all. Thank you. Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 702 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? $702. You there? Am I still connected?
Yes, sir.
Oh, 702?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah, a little distant. Who's this?
Hey, Sam, it's Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas.
Bro Flamingo, how are you? Just back off your phone just a little bit. You get a little staticky.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent. I got a couple of things to say real quick. It's really hard without Michael's passing. I don't even know what to say. I already cried already a lot. I might cry again. He actually, because I remember when the president won the election, you know, I got tired of watching MSNBC and all the garbage, and so I found you guys, right? So when I kicked on the podcast, you know, and when I listened to it, I heard that horrible Gen X music. I was like, man, this is awful, and I turned it off. And I saw you guys on YouTube. Michael doing his Obama impression, and then I was sold, and the rest is history. That was like, wow. Yeah, so I've been listening to you guys like 4 years now.
Wow.
Calling in, I don't know, but he's the one who drew me in, but the rest is history. You get what I'm saying? And it's the only thing I can say. It's like I look at this a different way. I see all the positive outpouring from Mike, you know what I'm saying, and the things that he taught me, things that all of you guys have taught me, but especially Mike. You know, I can't tell you, I'm literally a different person on a fundamental level. I can't stress this enough. And you know what I'm saying? And the thing that really struck me, the contrast, Sam, was, you know, rest in peace, Michael Brooks, you know what I'm saying? But that same day, you know, you had a bunch of fascists running around in all the cities, you know, trying to round people up. And I see that, you know what I'm saying? And I saw that, and I saw that contrast, and it's like, you know, playtime is over, you know what I'm saying? And Michael's a really nice guy, and Mike was, and you know, he really taught me a lot of things, even to be more human, to be honest. I know it sounds crazy, but it's like there's certain things like, yeah, these guys aren't just all POSs. There are actually distinct reasons to why this is happening. You know what I'm saying? So this is why you have to understand. I also know that these guys are not playing around. And I think Michael was trying to tell us that. You know what I'm saying? At least to all come together. You know what I'm saying? Because I just feel like with the passing of Michael Brooks and what's going on right now, this is a really stark contrast. And we really lost somebody who, you know, that really spoke to the humanity of a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people, Sam, and I'll say one more quick thing because this is kind of hard. Because I cried like, well, you know, one of my girlfriends were like, "Oh my God, you know, why are you crying?" I was like, "Michael Brooks is going." She's like, "Who is that?" And I have to explain to them. But that's the power. That's literally the power. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? I'm crying for somebody that I never met, but I talked to literally three weeks ago. It's literally the epitome of, do you have the courage to fight for somebody that doesn't look like you, or you may not know them exactly? You get what I'm saying? It's all there, and he epitomized that. And the last thing I'll leave with you, oh man, this is hard. Rest in peace, Michael. But it's just like, it's not fair, because you see the worst elements, the dregs of society extract everything from us, and then Michael has to go. But the last thing. So, Sam, I'll leave you with this. Well, is there any possibility if Mitch McConnell and all those guys sit there and try to do stupid stuff with the next stimulus bill or whatnot, is there any possibility that Trump does an end run around the Senate Republicans to try to deal with the Democrats, just for the fact that he'll need it for his reelection chances? Do you see any possibility of that, or do you see Mitch McConnell's ticket? Because this is kind of going back to what we were talking about, where this could be a posture, but maybe Mitch McConnell is actually misreading the situation, or maybe Donald Trump's just too stupid to read that opportunity. Because I just don't think that cutting the benefits to 600. Where is this popular? Who are they talking to? I know who they're talking to, but that's not winning anything. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I share your disbelief. I would have thought it's not like Donald Trump has an ideology, and I don't know why he wouldn't do what you're talking about, but I don't know. I don't think he's going to, but I don't know why he wouldn't.
I mean, I think he's relying on the fact
Bro
that the
Flamingo,
people.
Go ahead, Jamie. Bro Flamingo, I just got to let you go, okay? Because it's just getting a little loud.
Absolutely.
Appreciate the call.
Let the best guy take care.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Go ahead,
Thank
Jamie.
you. I think he's counting on the fact that the people who still like him are totally cucked. They are used to getting nothing. They expect nothing. And anyone who was kind of along for the ride because of Trump's phony, economic populism, that's done. It's just pure, crazy, racist politics of resentment now that keeps people attached to him, I think.
I agree, but how would it hurt for him to do that, though?
Well, I could see Trump doing the runaround, but I could also see Mitch McConnell just saying, no, I will not bring this to the Senate floor, and we will not vote on this as well.
I mean, I could see that happening, but why haven't we seen the first thing?
Yeah.
Why hasn't Donald Trump done that? I agree with you, Jamie. But the only thing I can imagine if they feel that they can somehow, if what you were saying is the case, and it very well may be, but one would imagine that at the very least, then they would try and racialize the COVID relief, right? I for the life of me, I am completely at a loss as to why they don't take that opportunity. Because let me put it this way. In the run-up to the election, George W. Bush, if there was a hurricane in Florida, the state would be awash in federal funds. It specifically that happened I think in 2004. I can't remember exactly the details off the top of my head. Presidents do this. Governors do this. It's and why? And now I don't get it. I think maybe, like I say, when I say these things are insane, I think that they could literally be just sheer insanity that is driving this stuff. I don't know what else to say. Calling from a 570 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. It's Julian from PA. How you doing?
Julian from PA. What's on your mind?
I just also wanted to express my condolences for Michael's passing. My mom is from Brazil, and she's a Bolsonista. And the only person I found that was speaking from a place of intelligence that I felt like I could trust was Michael about Lula and Lava Jato, until, of course, he introduced me to Brazil Wire. But I always appreciated that when I could discuss things with my mom from a place of intelligence,
I think he would be very happy to hear that.
Yeah. But my question is about a decision made, I think yesterday, maybe the day before, about from the Reagan Foundation saying, oh, Donald Trump, you're not allowed to use Reagan's image anymore to fundraise. And, the Bill Kristols of the world, of course, were very happy to see that. But, you also see a lot of people across the aisle very, very excited to see Reagan's legacy kept away from the shame of Trump, as if the legacy or the intellectual value of conservatism and Republican ethos has nothing to do with Trump and his project. So I guess my question more clearly is, why is the general American public, after hearing about Iran-Contra and seeing decades of Reaganomics fail, why do they still have like
Because
an
Democrats,
affection for Reagan?
because Republicans have made it a concerted effort. Listen, 15 years ago, they were literally trying to get his face on Mount Rushmore and to put his face on the dime. I'm not. I am not joking. Grover Norquist had a big campaign to do this because they understand the value of what our guest today was talking about. You write the narrative, you write the history, and these icons become, that. Democrats do a lousy job at, look at the way that George W. Bush has been rehabilitated. The man is a war criminal. The man should be, literally the question should be, is it time to commute his sentence? That should be the question, but it's not. And the Democrats have failed, and I appreciate the call, Jules. I'm going to let you go. The Democrats have failed so comprehensively. It's not even a failure because there has been no genuine attempt by the leadership of the Democratic Party, because they are so desperate to get those suburban voters,
those
to
mythical moderates,
to hold Mitch McConnell, to hold Kevin Wright, and to hold Paul Ryan back in the day, or John Boehner for that matter, when he was not admonishing his own caucus from raising bills about raising birther bills. The Republican Party is responsible for Donald Trump, period, end of story. That includes the Never Trumpers. Their work, and Wilson's the only one who's honest about it, despite the fact that still he should have the opportunity to say we're responsible, and then that should be it. He should be gone. Talk about canceling people. All these people should have been canceled. They all should have been canceled. Bill Christ, I don't care how good of videos they're making. They should be they should be done.
Yeah,
They should be done. And it is, we have Donald Trump because of everything these Never Trumpers did. Not exclusively them, but because of exactly what they did. And they do not have the ability, even if they are earnest in their attempts, they don't have the ability to make up for that. And their presence is problematic in many ways because they are building the next Trump even as they tear this one down. Mm-hmm. Next time it'll be Tom Cotton. That person will be smarter or whatever it is. They are building the next Donald Trump. They need to renounce politics. They need to say, this is my last political act, making this video against Donald Trump. And then I'm done opining and contributing and involving in politics because I know I need to be everything I did, my policies, my perspectives, the campaigns I ran before, the op-eds I wrote before, all created Donald Trump. And the Democrats are it's almost impossible to express how much liability they have for not holding McConnell and Ryan responsible in the run-up to the election for Donald Trump, for not implicating Republicans in it. When they half-assed impeachment, they also let them off the hook. It is not enough to win the election. At this point, it is quite clear that either a tin can or nobody could win this election, right? It doesn't matter. Joe Biden's best play is to stay in that cave. Fine. I understand that. But they should be going out and aggressively tying Donald Trump to the Republican Party because he is.
Yeah. I mean, Democrats are totally unwilling to look at all of the structural factors that gave rise to Donald Trump, right? Because they are culpable in some of it. But certainly, if you're comparing culpability, the Republicans are more culpable, and it would be smart politics to pin it to them.
Well, I'm not even talking about that structural stuff. I mean, because I think there's an argument that, you know, the failure to do X, Y, and Z creates an environment. But I'm talking about just from a sheer partisan perspective, that the Republican Party's ideology is what gave birth to Donald Trump, the figure, not necessarily the context, because that he was elected. I mean, I think, look, we have a broader problem in terms of, you know, the Democratic Party not providing material benefit, but I don't to people. But the Republican Party created the animal, Donald Trump, and Donald Trump. The context could be the same, but Donald Trump cannot win in a Democratic Party. That is the narrow point that I'm trying to make in this moment, is that these people have no right to disavow the Republican Party from Donald Trump. Ronald Reagan,
certainly not.
The line from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump is unbroken. I mean, really is.
He was a celebrity too.
Indeed. All right, folks. Sorry, we don't have any more time for calls. I apologize. We've got to put the call capper on there again. We had something like, I don't know, 70 calls. But we will, you know, I anticipate that we're going to be talking, you know, the people are going to have their opportunity to pay their respects to Michael for some time to come, and that's okay. 3 more IMs, and then we're out of here. Teacher Lauren, without the federal unemployment, I'd be getting $185 a week, and I have no job to go back to until at least September. I'd love to see Mnuchin and Cruz try and live on that. Charlie Kirk's punchable face. This recession is a perfect example of why Say's law is full of holes. See Keynes. And lastly, the final IM of the day. This is from Tucker Carlson. Trucker Carlson. Do you think Marco Rubio will show up at John Lewis's coffin at the Capitol today and start regaling his friends with stories about watching Carl Lewis run in the 1980s? Well done. Jamie, Brendan, Kyle, thanks for helping out today. Matt will be back tomorrow. We will see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie.